Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you're joining us for this year's first Sustainability Dialogues of 2023. Today, we're focusing on the leadership requirements when we come to creating a net zero economy. We are very happy to have with us the ambassadors both from Sweden to India and India to Sweden. The Leadership Group of Industrial Transition was inaugurated in 2019, both by the governments of India and Sweden, looking to create roadmaps across stakeholders and industry for a net zero economy. To start today's discussion, we have a recording from Ambassador of Sweden to India, Jan Tesla, and we'll play that for you.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be able to take part in this first Sustainability Dialogue of 2023. These dialogues started all the way back in 2021 and have been a very good way for members of the Sweden-India corridor to come together to discuss the very real opportunities and possible roadblocks that exist as we together move forward on our way to our global goals. Discussing from a point of operational experience is a strong way to understand how challenges can and have been overcome. Today's dialogue brings together an esteemed group of speakers who will share their unique perspectives and experience on this important issue. Through this, we can gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities in moving forward in decarbonizing transport. I believe that by working together, we can leverage our respective strengths to drive progress and achieve our shared goals. Through dialogue and collaboration, we can find innovative solutions that benefit both our countries and, as a result, the planet as a whole. I would, at this point, like to take the opportunity to thank the Embassy of India in Sweden, the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in India, and Sweden-India Business Council for their commitment to organize the sustainability dialogues and bringing us together to have these important exchanges. I would also like to thank all of you who are here either physically or virtually. Your presence demonstrates your commitment to sustainability and your willingness to engage in meaningful dialogue. I look forward to a very productive and insightful discussion today. Tailpipe emissions from cars, trucks and other road vehicles account for around 75% of all carbon emissions from mobility. That is approximately 6 gigatons of CO2 per year. And this in its turn makes up close to 15 to 18% of total global CO2 emissions. The automotive industry has a major role to play in helping a country, a society, achieve zero GHG emissions. This is especially true for a country like India, as many estimates suggest that India to be the fourth largest vehicle market in the world, and the continued need for improved mobility and infrastructure with an ever-growing population. But it is one that requires all hands on deck. Across the auto industry, manufacturers are pursuing a transition to electric, connected, autonomous, and shared mobility. Governments have introduced policies that encourage the decarbonization of road transport, and the adoption of EVs has accelerated since 2020. We should also not forget that customer demand is also on the rise. But on the other hand, electrification and other transitions towards decarbonization will take time and happen segment by segment and market by market. Companies will have to design a comprehensive decarbonization plan that focuses on vehicles, on infrastructure, and on fleet management, while also working to address and limit GHG emissions across the value chain, and working with suppliers to support them on their path towards net zero. The shift to low emission vehicles could create opportunities for companies across the value chain. Such opportunities include manufacturing EV batteries and fuel cells, producing the materials needed to make those essential components, building, making, and operating the infrastructure of EVs, and creating digital solutions to integrate the new vehicle energy infrastructure with the power grid. I am extremely proud and happy that LEADIT is one such key initiative launched by the governments of India and Sweden at the UN Climate Action Summit in September 2019, that brings together countries, companies, and industry experts to achieve net zero emissions from heavy industries by 2050. The initiative has placed industry transition on the global agenda through high-level dialogues, joint leader statements, and policy guidance. LEADIT also supports national transition plans in emerging economies and boosts transparency of decarbonization efforts by providing tracking tools for industry transition roadmaps and low-carbon investments. We must act, and we must act urgently to address this challenge and transition to a sustainable, low-carbon transport system. The good news is that technological advancements are making it possible to achieve this goal in a cost-effective and efficient manner. Sweden is at the forefront of this discussion together with India, having taken significant steps toward decarbonization. However, we all know there is still much to be done. I'm happy to know that discussions like today's sustainability dialogue takes the discussion to all of us with the industry partners. Thank you very much for having me on the sustainability dialogue today, and I wish you exciting, insightful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Tesla, for that address. It's a big year for India and Sweden. As you know, we have Sweden as the presidency of the EU and India leading the G20. So we're very happy to have with us today's first dialogue, Ambassador Tanmaya Lal, Ambassador of India to Sweden and Latvia, to give us an address on this inaugurative session. Ambassador Lal, over to you.
Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes.
Good morning, and it's good to join this year's edition of Sustainability Dialogues. And may I start by thanking the SIBC, Ambassador Jan Teslev, and all other partners who are here with us today. This is indeed a useful discussion. Sweden we all know, is a leader in sustainability. Swedish companies pioneer cleaner technologies. Swedish consumers contribute by supporting more sustainable products. India too is moving fast domestically in this field and is also emerging as an important global voice on sustainability. More than 50 years ago, when Sweden took the lead in drawing the global attention to environment, India was the only other nation whose head of government joined the Stockholm summit. And last year, we engaged actively at the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. As was mentioned by Ambassador Teslev, in 2019, both our countries jointly launched the leadership of group on industry transition, the LEAD IT. And already the membership has now grown to 36 countries and companies, major players in this field. And it is good to see that the head of the Secretariat for LEAD IT, Mr. Per Andersson, is also joining this discussion today. Sweden also joined the International Solar Alliance that was launched by Prime Minister Modi and President Sarkozy in 2015. And only a few months back, Prime Minister Modi and the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, jointly launched the Mission Life, Lifestyle for Environment. That is a campaign, global campaign that seeks to involve every individual across the globe in this action towards sustainability. As we all know, India has now become the 5th largest economy from being 11th largest only a decade back. However, there is a very long way to go as our per capita income is still fairly low. So what this tells us is that both the pace and the scale of further growth and business opportunities that lie ahead. India is making all efforts to decouple its economic growth with the energy requirement. And therefore, the decarbonization of development is a very apt theme for this discussion. India is setting and achieving very, very ambitious climate action targets. And immediately now, the next targets to be achieved by end of 2030, as you may be knowing, are 500 gigawatt of non-fossil energy, half of the total energy to come from renewables, a reduction of 1 billion tons of carbon emissions, a reduction of energy intensity of our economic growth by 45% over the 2005 levels, and production of 1 million tons of hydrogen annually. This huge ambition provides a very clear policy pathway and a scale that can determine the profitability of innovation and businesses. The ongoing scale and speed of development in India is truly transformational. And of course, infrastructure and mobility are the key sectors in this, which are leading the way. In the last few years alone, the number of airports in India, for instance, has doubled to be now around 150, and the number is growing further. More than 11,000 kilometers of highways are being built or expanded every year. Nearly 4,500 kilometers of new railway tracks have been laid in the last 1 year alone. At the same time, 6,000 route kilometers of railway tracks have been electrified in the last couple of years. Railway stations, coaches are deploying solar energy. Delhi Metro is running on solar power that is generated 800 kilometers away from Delhi. Airports such as Cochin and Delhi are running on solar power. Very significantly, now the government is focusing and incentivizing manufacturers for electric vehicles, green hydrogen, biofuels for the mobility sector, including the 2-, 3-, and 4-wheeler vehicles, buses, trucks, railways, and aviation. Big tax breaks and financing options are offered to customers who are opting to buy electric vehicles. So these are very, very exciting times for change. And as Ambassador Teslev also mentioned, awareness, which is an important issue, and customer interest is important, and that's also growing very fast. I often give this example. A couple of months back, Hyderabad hosted the first Formula Electric race in India. And two of the teams, Mahindra and Tata's, were featuring in this very high-profile competition. I was in Delhi recently, and it was remarkable to see friends who are only now using electric mobility cab services in Delhi. Some of you would be knowing that the India Premier League cricket tournament is currently undergoing. I mean, it is ongoing. And if you see every day, the sponsor car on display at the cricket venues is an electric vehicle. If we come to the charging stations, that is increasing very fast. And from a current number of around 10,000 in India, it's slated to become almost 20,000 next year. Same as the story for the battery swapping station and battery swapping services. That also is increasing very quickly. In 2021, the number of electric vehicle sales was 1 million in India. And Most of these are currently in the 2 or 3-wheeler segment. And this was only 5% of the total automobile sales at that stage. So there's a huge potential that's available going forward. In fact, a media report that I saw only today talked about how the growing sales of EVs in India are also now coming from the tier 2 and tier 3 cities, and not only from the big metros. So that's a very important development. Sales of the bigger 4-wheel electric vehicle cars from last year has already been matched in the first 3 months of this year alone. So that again tells us of the pace of the change that is taking place. I saw some projections which indicate that by 2030, annually 13 million electric vehicles will be sold annually in India. All this represents a huge business opportunity and collaboration opportunity. Some estimates put it at around $200 billion by 2030. And both the big businesses and the startups are showing huge interest in this, not only the EV sector, but also the green hydrogen and bioethanols sectors. Innovation for sustainability and green transition remain the core areas of India-Sweden partnership, and the space is only increasing by the day. Before concluding, I would also like to mention, as Arati referred to this being a landmark year, with both India and Sweden holding very important responsibilities at various global platforms, EU and G20. But this year also marks 75 years of India-Sweden diplomatic engagement, and that's a cause for celebration and seeing how this partnership goes forward. This also marks, I believe, 20 years of Sweden-India Business Council. They are doing a fantastic job. They were really, I think, they were a big factor of help in the SEB Nordic conference that was held in India very successfully recently. If we look at the political engagement, last 3 months alone, several ministerial engagements have taken place, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Foreign Trade, but also the Minister of Environment and Minister of Finance. And this is going forward. This is more visits and exchanges are coming up. I would just like to thank the SIBC for initiating and sustaining this dialogue. And these are useful conversations. And I look forward to listening to the professionals and the real experts in this field for their experience, perspectives, and insights and plans. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us that address and making the points that you make, because what you've said is something that we want to pick up and, of course, unpack during the course of today's dialogue, and that's the targets that every country is setting. And as you've said, India has set ambitious targets when it comes to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and of course, emissions reductions. And this focuses on a number of different aspects to bring together these roadmaps: product, process, but if not, more importantly than all of those, collaboration, to align incentives for operational realities and targets to be met. And you've mentioned, of course, the number of platforms India and Sweden share, one of those being Lead IT, and creating those roadmaps for multiple stakeholders. And we're so happy to have with us, of course, for today's session as well, Per Anderson, Head of the Secretariat for Lead IT, to join our panel discussion, but to begin with a short address. Per, I'll ask you to give us a few words.
Good morning, everybody, and it's an honor to be here today with all the distinguished guests, and thank you for the kind words of the Ambassador of Sweden and the Ambassador of India. Lead It, of course, is a manifestation of the joint leadership Sweden and India. I am the head of the Secretariat. I report to the Management Board of Sweden and India, and we serve the members. The members today are 18 member states and 18 member companies, all engaged in finding the frontiers of where the next industry transition leap will be, and how we can go forward in public and private partnership. We were, as the ambassadors mentioned, created in the summit in the UN 2019. We are now returning to the UN and the summit of 2023. In fact, This is recorded in New York, where we are at the moment, preparing for the upcoming summit and what LEADIT and the Sweden-India partnership will be in the future as we push the frontier forward. Today, we think the world has changed a little bit since 2019. The global industrial policy have developed in almost all regions. Industry is maybe even more in the driving seat of the transformation of our society and of industry, and maybe very recognizable in the transport sector. And what Ambassador Lal said about the electrical vehicle expansion is really tangible, and maybe the transport sector is leading other sectors to transform, and we're very pleased to see that, and very happy to work with you. We work on different strings. We do road maps. We help and assist countries to do road maps. As a matter of fact, today we have a team in South Africa, in Johannesburg, working with the South African government and on the steel industry and stakeholders from businesses and civil society for their transformation. We plan to return to India in the summer to work further on roadmaps. We track investments. So if you will browse into our website, you will see how we almost in real time try to track investments in steel, cement, or if the roadmap creation, to get our finger on the pulse of where business are going. We try to push the discussion forward by organizing tech forums. For example, we know that some of the issues are sensitive, some of the issues are highly technical. We have organized, for example, sessions on carbon border adjustment mechanisms with the people who wrote the legislation. We know that for your industry, standards and maybe most notable in the steel sector is an emerging issue and is difficult. We also think that, I think both ambassadors addressed the issues of innovation and quickly apply breakthrough technology in the transition. What can we do more here? We're also working on the issue of finance. How can we mobilize, de-risk, creating an enable environment for further investments into the transformation of industry? We think that is highly, maybe one of the more difficult segments, but one of the most important ones to get private and public investments into the transition agenda. So we hope to focus on that as we move forward, how we can both share risks and the rewards. I think I'll stop there, and we're happy to answer questions. And we noticed that some of the LEADIT members are here today, so happy to give a shout out to you guys, and happy to talk to others about LEADIT as well. But I think I'll stop there, and thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much, Arati and your team, for organizing this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Per, for being here with us as well to start this year's discussion. Now, of course, those of us working with Lead IT and aware of the work that you've done understand the importance and collaboration of such hard to abate sectors like cement and steel, and hybrid becomes something that's made international headlines on what can be done when parties come together to innovate, to collaborate, and to provide R&D together. We have today with us, of course, two OEMs in the mobility sector. We have Soanjit Randhawa, Head of Sustainability Affairs for Volvo Group India. Ankit Todi for Mahindra Group is a little bit late in joining. He's in traffic in Bangalore. So those of us who've been to Bangalore understand this is a very real issue to be contended as we develop these roadmaps. But before Ankit joins us, Soanjit, I'm going to hand over to you to just create a quick introduction of Volvo Group and what you're doing on the ground, and of course, the collaborations that you're part of.
Thank you, Arati, and really pleased to be here along with all the panelists and Ambassador Tanmay Lal. Thank you for inviting me. Just to brief and introduce you to what Volvo Group is up to, and especially with respect to India. Well, most of you know Volvo Group. I can say that in India, Volvo Group mirrors the global profile with our presence here with construction equipment, trucks, buses, engines, and Volvo Financial Services. Additionally, we of course have our JV with Eicher Motors, one of the most successful JV in our view in the industry, VE commercial vehicles. I'm very pleased to let you know that this year would be the 25th year of Volvo Group in India, which is quarter century spent in India. So we're very much at home within the country, and I'll explain a little more about that. I think we are in the transport industry, which has been mentioned a lot by the ambassador and our colleague. We in this industry, like many other industries, are going through this once in a lifetime transformation. This has been fueled because of net zero ambitions and demands, by sustainability commitments, and the emergence of technologies which are shifting the entire dimension under which we operate going forward. Under this, Volvo Group has committed to a net zero ambition of a rolling fleet net value chain ambition of net zero to 2050, which actually means that Volvo has to be net zero by 2040 because our vehicles run on the road for at least 10 years typically. And now this covers the entire world, and of course that covers India too. Some markets may go slow, some fast, but in the end we need to meet that point. Just to add that we of course have 2030 interim targets where we plan to reduce our emission intensity from the vehicles from 35 to 45%, which means in a brand like Volvo Trucks, among all our trucks, we actually plan to go up to 50%. And Volvo Trucks is already sending commercial electric vehicles in the regional and city environment globally. We plan to reduce the emissions from operations by 50% by 2030, and of course be net zero by the targeted date. Now, the good thing about this is that much of this transformation, which is happening within the company, which is quite dramatic and organization-wide, has a big role from India. Number one, we have the number 2 R&D site here in India, which is operating on the traditional technology areas in R&D, but now electromobility, hydrogen fuel cells, connectivity, digitalization are the areas we are working from India, supporting the group to transform into the future, which we have committed to. Similarly, in digital and IT, we are committed playing a big role towards the digital transformation of the entire company and making data at the core of whatever we do. And things are really, really moving fast externally and internally in this area because everybody's moving from products, they're moving to systems approach. And that makes it that you don't take a focused view of one area, you take the entire picture. This means that we are crossing domains, we are crossing technology areas, and this future cannot be done alone. We need partnerships and collaborations. And that is why when you read about Volvo and how we're going to go into the future, there's a partnership in batteries, there's a partnership in charging stations, there's a partnership, of course, in fossil-free steel, in hydrogen, in almost every aspect moving forward. We have multiple partnerships because partnership is now going to be the new leadership as we get into the next 10 years and more. And again, in India, we have the number 2 site for Campix, which is the innovation hub for Volvo. I can probably talk a little more later, but this is one which is accelerating business transformation along with startups along that. I think because a lot of members here from Lead It and Per Anderson mentioned it, a lot has happened in this area globally where you've heard about the fossil-free steel products which we sold, the construction equipment just last year after introducing it in the year before. And we introduced this to our customer, which is a great step ahead. But I'm really glad to say that on the same inspiration from this fossil-free steel, India also started working in areas like this, and we introduced the first green casting from India for our engines globally. So things are happening in that front too, and of course it's in partnership with our suppliers. When it comes to the products, of course, globally, as I mentioned, we will be fully electric or fossil-free ICE engines going forward, because there's no silver bullet for how things will pan out in the going forward. It'll be battery electric, it'll be hydrogen fuel cell, and it will be still ICE engines running on fossil-free fuel. India, electromobility is moving very fast, but it's actually quite a bit on the two-wheeler and now the four-wheeler segment. When it comes to the heavy-duty applications and long haul, we may need to wait before electromobility catches up on that long distances, but though it will happen. Maybe there'll be interim steps taken in that area with alternative fuels like LNG, etc. But there's a lot of work already happening in the country on hydrogen, etc. In parallel. And of course, our JV has doing things. So there will be a mix of solutions which will come forward depending on the application, depending on the duty cycles, depending on the market, depending upon the local resources. So this is how we go forward. Maybe I will stop here at this point of time and take your questions later to speak more on this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Soranjit. And of course, Volvo has been one of the strongest partners SIBC has been working with in this area. One of the many collaborations, of course, is the Sweden-India Technology Innovation and Safety Platform, which brings together triple helix partners like Volvo, and of course, on the Indian side as well. And we're very happy in this dialogue, and just in the nick of time to have an Indian OEM with us as well, who is leading the discussion when it comes to moving forward towards collaborative targets. Ankit Todi, thank you so much for joining us. Sustainability Strategy and Partnerships Mahindra Group. I know you were stuck in traffic, and we understand that can be a real challenge when it comes to getting on the road, off the road in India. But thank you for being here. And we've just had, of course, Soranjit introduce Volvo and what Volvo is doing in this larger collaborative framework of net zero. And it'd be great to hear from you and hear about Mahindra.
Thank you so much, Aarti. And firstly, my sincere apologies for showing up late. That was definitely not the plan. But I'll focus on the conversation at hand, and let me start off by talking a little bit about the Mahindra Group as a whole in terms of how do we think about sustainability. Broadly, the group has presence across multiple sectors, auto and farm equipment manufacturing being the major part of the group, but also presence in financial sector, also presence in construction sector, in the renewable sector now. So what we wanted to do about a year back is to holistically look at all our different businesses and how can we bring it all together. Things like brand, IT are some of the things that are generally driven from the center. The rest of the business were generally driven by the individual companies, each publicly listed company. But sustainability, we felt, was a topic that really was an area where we could collaborate more closely, even within the group to begin with. And in that attempt, what we did is that we now think of Mahindra, trying to take it away from a conversation which is entirely focused on only emission reduction, carbon neutrality, to sort of setting the bar a little higher. And what I mean by that is that we have started talking about something called being planet positive as a company. And there are three broad aspects that we defined as part of this strategy. The first is what we sort of very colloquially, I put it as cleaning our house, which is greening our own operations. So doing all the hygiene things around emission reduction, getting to carbon neutrality, starting with scope 1 and 2 emissions, getting focusing on RE power, getting our group companies to 100% RE, focusing on energy efficiency. In fact, one of the group companies was the first company globally to achieve the EP 100 target, which is doubling energy productivity in a certain phase of time. The other aspects of this part is focusing on waste and water reduction, again, getting all locations to 100% net zero waste and net zero water uses. And the third element of this exercise was focusing on material circularity. That is, again, something that we want to bring in our businesses, both for the auto part of things, but also for the construction of different properties that we have. So be it factory, be it a warehouse, be it construction that's happening as part of our real estate business. So bringing in elements of circularity using green material, recycled material, or recyclable material, those being the principles. So that was pillar one. Doing all things possible to have a relatively positive impact on the environment in our own operations where we have 100% control. Having said that, what we also realized that a large part of the action would have to be driven by what happens in the industry and the ecosystem around us, which is where we sort of call a second pillar as playing a part in decarbonizing the industries that we are present in. Again, two or three major levers that we are pulling. One is a shift in the industry itself. So to give an example, the auto industry moving into EVs. We now have a big play in the passenger EV segment. There's a lot of cars coming in the EV segment in the near future. Similarly, in the three-wheeler commercial segment, that's a market which is much more mature when it comes to EV. The Mahindra Group broadly has about a 60 to 70% market share in the three-wheeler EV segment. Not just limited to, again, auto and farm, but also in areas like holidays and resorts. Our resorts are now committing to become green resorts, all the resorts. There are about 45 properties that the group owns. A lot of them are already IGBC Platinum certified resorts, but we want to go a step further and make sure that they are green in the true sense on multiple different parameters, from energy, wastewater, and the impact that they have, even on things like biodiversity. Similarly, the Mahindra Logistics business is thinking about how can we offer services which are based on EVs. And we have a new business line which is called eDel, which is last mile delivery using e-vehicles. So the intention there is to, for each of our different businesses in the group, figure out ways on how we can move the industry forward. The second part of this exercise when it comes to the ecosystem is very focused on the supplier and the dealer side of things. So as a group, and especially in the auto industry, we hugely depend on our entire supplier network. There's almost 1,000 plus suppliers, 1,000 to 1,200 in that range, the number of suppliers that we work. And there, it's to some extent, I think, influence without authority in a lot of these cases. And there, what we are trying to figure out is that what is the best way in which we can take these suppliers along. For us, it's a meaningful part of the scope 3 emissions for us, but at the same time, it's also value accretive for the suppliers. So there, very recently, what we have kicked off is going to be India's first pilot program with United Nations Global Compact. We have bought about 150 of our suppliers, and over a course of 6 months, doing a series of online workshops and offline sessions with them to help them realize the value of sustainability, and not just the planet case for sustainability, but also realize the business case for sustainability. So that's the second broad focus on the decarbonizing industry. And the third bit is, again, trying to find additional models of circularity. So to give an example, we again, as a group, have a presence in the auto recycling space, end-of-life vehicle recycling. So that's another area which is still nascent in India, driven by regulatory factors and a bunch of other factors. But we continue to invest in that business, and hopefully will have a much bigger business in the end-of-life recycling of vehicles, and similarly also getting into battery recycling, which becomes more and more important with EVs coming in. And in a few years, we'll have the old lithium-ion batteries. So that's the second pillar broadly, and I'll just take maybe another minute or so to cover the third pillar very quickly. So the third pillar is what we are saying is what we call regenerating nature. Things that we can do outside of our immediate business areas. Here, to some extent, driven by either a CSR obligation or because it's the right thing to do as a company, as a country, for the country's priorities. So 2-3 big areas there. One is we have a very scale tree plantation program. We have planted about 20 million trees already. The intent is to try and do about 4 to 5 million trees every year for the next decade or so. This is currently entirely funded by the CSR program. A second part, which is seeing a lot of prominence, and not just in India, but also at a global scale, is the issue of food security. And in India, given the nature of the farming ecosystem, and a large part of a very important stakeholder for our business is also the farmer community. So there we have actually a new business which is providing a free service for farmers to be able to shift into regenerative agriculture. So currently, as of now, we have worked with about 25,000 farmers, where we sort of, with their help, take 1 acre of plot and literally handhold them through a 6-month exercise to be able to adopt better regenerative agricultural practices, which are both financially useful, but also nature positive. So that's the second sort of exercise, and the intent again is to scale it to as larger impact, and it is completely free of cost for the farmer. So this is the second sort of thing in the last pillar that we are doing, things outside of our immediate business line, but is generally positive for the environment. And then, having said this, to enable, I think, all of these things, we constantly also need to make sure that all our leaders in business strategy is aligned. So a bunch of activities in that direction. I'll pause with that.
Ankit, I think that's a great way to actually end the introduction, because you mentioned, both Soanjit and Ankit have mentioned some key buzzwords or key kind of areas we have to move forward with. You mentioned, of course, aligning incentives across your stakeholders. Also, I think what you presented was a 360 view with a business alignment and business strategy behind it. And I think these are really important considerations as we move forward. Now, Per, I'm going to ask you a question, because we move into the panel discussion part of the webinar today. And what you've heard now from the two OEMs that are members of Lead IT is that both in their own ways are providing great steps forward by working with the supply chains, working through collaboration. And Soanjit said very, very importantly, collaboration is the new leadership and partnership is the new leadership. And it can't be kind of a one template solution for all partners, but there needs to be kind of a step-by-step approach, no silver bullet, as Soanjit said. And this becomes a really important way for Lead IT to bring together stakeholders and partners across industry, across government. Industry, of course, and industry stewardship leads the way. But Per, how do you balance the very diverse set of memberships that you have? Now, I think you have more than 40 or 30 governments and, of course, industry partners. Cement and steel maybe has been kind of phase one of how Lead It has built up. And, of course, you have today two representatives of possibly phase two, which is OEMs and the way they can lead the kind of way forward towards a net zero target.
Thank you, Rati, and thank you, Volvo and Mahindra Group. It was truly inspiring, actually, to listen to you. And I was just thinking of the same question, Rati. How do we do this? Because it's true, we have the last 2 years maybe focused on steel, cement sector, and the hard to abate core industry segment. That's where we have been mostly. That's where we have been involved in the work plans on the ground. While listening to both Volvo and Mahindra, I think you can play a very important role to showcase the public-private partnerships that you can do. I wonder if not the transport sector is a few years ahead of the crowd here a little bit. So the demand-driven part of the partnership, we will see now. How do people on standards and what kind of steel will be in the cars and what kind of batteries will we get. Maybe we will see a more demand-driven exercise when we move forward in this partnership. So in a way, it's connected for us when we look at the full value chain, which we would like to do. We like to have the holistic view, because we know that a true transformation, yes, it requires a partnership. Yes, it requires public buy-in, and it requires a public acceptance. It requires civil society. It requires energy, transport, social policies to get it right. But if we can stay focused on the full value chain and see how that develops and really make the most out of it, I think maybe, to me, it's most evident when we talk about standards. What kind of standards is the transport industry demanding today? And how is that affected? That's the most tangible issue. It's sensitive, yes, and we Lead It is, as you said, it's not a homogeneous crowd, and maybe it shouldn't be either. But we have to meet somewhere, I think. So it's truly inspiring. Thank you, Rati, also for the question. It was a very good question.
Thank you, Per. I'm actually going to take that question and hand it over to Ankit and Soanjit. And I want to say to the audience, you do have the ability to put in questions into the chat. So please, if you have questions coming out of this discussion, put them into the chat window down below. We'll ask them to the audience, to the panelists. And if you do have a specific question for a specific panelist, do let us know that as well. But now I'm going to turn to Ankit and Soanjit. So you've heard what Per said, which is basically look at the whole value chain and understand kind of demand-driven change. And I'd like to ask both of you, of course, your business models and your strategies for collaboration, innovation, and partnership have, I would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, a business demand-driven approach to why they come together. So we're seeing more and more every year that we go on that there is an industry alignment and interest in creating sustainability initiatives because there is a business interest, as you said, Ankit, also in what you're doing. I'd like to start with Soanjit and then turn to Ankit. What would you like to see, or what do you see happening also in the trends as you develop roadmaps for Volvo in terms of innovation leading demand-driven change on the ground? Soanjit, you're mute. Thanks.
Yeah. I think we are getting into a world which I think Ankit quite well described. There's circularity, which means you can't just think about yourself, you need to think about the entire ecosystem. So I will try to say the demand has to come from all stakeholders and between stakeholders. So it is, for instance, your waste becomes somebody else's wealth, and that's an approach. And the number two thing is that the demand also comes from the fact that there's a lot of technology infusion happening, which creates new opportunities. So for instance, connectivity solutions, etc., are moving towards us looking at end-to-end solutions, which means that when you are doing that, you're dealing not with yourself, you need to see the entire system with overall perspective. And that includes everybody across the value chain. So for instance, in our transport, it's the customer, it's the policymakers, it's the regulators, it's us, and it's also the people who buy the final vehicle. Then, of course, the challenge is huge on sustainability. And it's not merely about knowing what you want, it is also discovering and exploring. So there's a lot of need to learn from each other, which means that we need to get out of our world and start looking at lighter materials, start looking at how hydrogen works, how will it affect our vehicle. So there's a lot of learning to be done, which is not what used to happen earlier, where you had everything with yourself. So to do this entire transformation, it's not one single stakeholder anymore. It's not like just the customer. It's the entire 360-degree stakeholders who have to come together, which is very important to remember when we move forward. But of course, then it becomes a chicken and egg story, maybe. So I like to take an example, say, from our supply chain focus, because that's critical for us going forward, because we source a lot from India, not the maximum, but a reasonable amount from India. And for us to go forward and be competitive, sustainability is a key factor. And we know that it may not happen. We thought that it may not happen just by sitting. Our suppliers need to gear up. So we started an entire partnership process where we sat with all our key suppliers and we went into a project mode on achieving sustainability targets going forward. We actually pushed them all to build a sustainability manager, even if there's a small company, because irrespective of whether he's titled sustainability manager or not, but he has to be responsible for that. We started with simple baselines so that they know where they are. And then we started moving forward to find solutions, which could be scientific solutions, which could be innovation, which could be partners with third or fourth party or with the state government. For instance, renewable energy is one big part of the whole story. And do they manage to achieve that in a particular state or not? So this entire thing has to be discussed. So we do it month after month after month. And that's where the example of the green casting, which we introduced last year for all engines, for our specific engines globally, came out from one of this discussion. And I'm really glad to say that after that, we now have 4 or 5 suppliers who have started committing that we will get green and we will do it by this much time. And then there's an increasing threshold being built among all suppliers in terms of this area. And they all started moving towards sustainability, not only because of us, because of the entire ecosystem coming together. For instance, what one supplier did in green casting, while it saves only just 2 parts of the engine to start with, and it'll grow, saves us about 8,500 tons globally, yearly. But if it was transferred to the entire foundries of the world, it would be 210 million tons saved just by a 6 months project, which could be taken across the board. Now, this entire story is about really working together, and this is another story when you start working, collaborating. It's not like working within the company. It's another animal. And I would say it's very easily used. You just don't come together and work. And as you know it pretty much from our Sweden-India transport innovation partnership, there's an entire learning process to collaborate. You really need to be able to transfer your thoughts, understand each other, transparency, XYZ, trust, before you realize that what you want and they want is the same thing, and it will be a win-win solution. So maybe we can talk more about this, but maybe I took a lot of time. Thank you.
No, I think what you said, Sonjit, is great. And I think Ankit also touched upon that in the introduction, and maybe you can unpack that a little bit more for us, is that increasingly collaboration partnership is a new leadership, but also what you're saying and what Ankit has said before and Pear's touched upon is that we have to step back from an in-silo perspective of how we develop collaboration. It has to be a 360 approach. It has to be beyond perhaps how we've looked at things 5, 10, 15 years ago to get to these very ambitious targets, not as individual companies, industry or government, but as a community and to create kind of common goals and common objectives. Ankit, give a few words before we go to questions on that.
Thank you, Aarti. I'm actually going to piggyback on what Sohanjit just said. I think collaboration is the theme, and it's just about finding the best ways to create value out of it. I'll take a non-auto example to sort of illustrate that point. So we again have a renewable energy business in the portfolio, and a very good global organization that emanated out of COP26. Called the Global Energy Alliance of People in Profit. They are working on just transition and bringing renewable energy to the masses in India. And we got together to figure out ways on how we can enable our suppliers to benefit from this. Now, there is no direct benefit for us as Mahindra Group, but it meets multiple objectives. It meets the country's objectives on decarbonization. It meets an external, very credible organizations on objective of helping the MSMEs transform into RE, and to some extent we'll get the benefit of reduced scope 3 emissions. And this is a conversation that is possible only if you have a collaborative mindset. So I think that that part, like what Sohanjit already stressed upon, working with a mindset that is about thinking of the greater good. That mindset change is extremely important when it comes to the area of sustainability. That's one fundamental difference as opposed to, let's say, many of the earlier thinking and when you're focused entirely on a business competitive advantage. Here, the competitive advantage is about the ability to share your learnings with each other, be it for the suppliers, be it for the technology, be it for the ways of working. That's one point. The other thing that I do want to react on is on the demand creation side of things. So there's obviously the upstream value chain. There's the other part, which is how do you sort of enable more and more people to adopt some of these technologies. And coming back to the auto side of things, we see in India that the two-wheeler EV market has matured to a large extent. The current thrust is on the three-wheeler EV market. Now, and a big enabler of demand in the three-wheeler EV segment is what kind of financing options are available. So there again, I think as a OEM, at least being part of the conversation or sort of driving some of these conversations, even if you don't have a direct stake in financing EV vehicles, can make a very meaningful difference in the conversation, both in terms of regulatory policies, in terms of what other companies are doing, what are the kind of partnerships that you can come together with different kinds of financiers. So things like these is something that I think as corporations, large corporations, and especially if we want to, call ourselves as leaders in the sustainability domain, we need to think about. So that's the two bits I would say. That one, trying and finding value for all the ecosystem partners from a variety of ways and having that collaborative mindset. And two, I think value unlocking, which leads to positive business outcomes, but could be a second order effect and not necessarily the first order effect, but investing time and energy in that as well. I think that that's the second shift. I'll pause with that.
Thanks so much, Ankit. I think both what Sohanjit and Ankit are saying right now is that a lot of what industry is doing and the roles we're taking in terms of stewardship in this discussion is looking at upskilling, because of course, in having this change mindset, it has to go from top to bottom with all the people that you're working with, not just with Mahindra and Volvo, but all your supply chain partners, your vendors, and the ecosystem. That becomes critical. And industry really has seen a business incentive to move forward in this regard. And of course, we go back to India's work in the early days with solar, and a lot of time and effort was spent in deciding, when it comes to financing also, upskilling the finance, the people behind the decisions on whom to finance and when to finance. It's very difficult to do if you don't understand the technology being put forward, because your bounded knowledge is limited. Then, of course, there's the unspoken partner here. Industry has taken a step forward. Of course, it responds to and reacts to regulation. Regulation can be kind of the marker the hand that directs change, the hand that supports change, say that we're here with you, we provide incentives behind regulation, we support you with standard setting and moving forward. There has been shifts in regulation, of course, across time. 2019, there was a very ambitious target set by the EU, for example, Per, where industries pushed back to say this is maybe too much for us. Recently, there's been a change where industry has said, we actually want you to move faster. We actually want to have roadmaps that put us all on the same page, which push a fossil-free economy, and we want to do more. Lead IT is in a very important space to balance these changes, balance these voices. But how does Lead IT pair, and how do you work with the regulatory, the kind of balance between regulation, industry, and actually creating change, institutional change?
Thank you, Atil. And once again, it's a superb question. Yes, regulation is driving this. We have corporate standards, private standards, also a driver. But yes, the policy development since 2019 has been substantial, of course. If we take it by region and our congregation, you see in the EU, the Fit for 55 proposal is probably a little bit underrated in its impact, I think. Now, the last bits is now being approved by the institutions as we speak. But so the leaded members are either in the EU or outside the EU. So that means in the future, just a few years from now, they will either be on the inside on the carbon border adjustment mechanism. If you're on the inside, your free allowances on the ETS market, for example, will be withdrawn. If you're on the outside, you have to pay the ETS. So this is a very tangible monetary change that will happen just in a few years from now. We'll see the development in the US and the Inflation Reduction Act and the maybe unparalleled program for encouraging green investments that we see in the US also has global effects. There are voices on what happened to the global level playing field. Will this have an effect on that? That discussion will come. We think that it is discussion probably within memberships like LEADIT and others. We have members on the regulatory side, both with the EU and the G7 and the G20. At this moment in time, we have members that are, India, of course, is a G20 presidency and a strong voice globally. And Sweden is, until the summer, the EU presidency, but we also have the Japanese G7 presidency. They're all driving, if not regulatory agendas, they're driving policy forward. I think we probably see demands for a more global level playing field to make a just decarbonization process. I think personally, but I think that is a discussion we have to have.
It's not an easy discussion to have because, as you say, you have so many different players coming together. But with enablers like Lead IT, we can actually see roadmaps that align incentives from a neutral perspective. It's amazing how fast time goes when you have the speakers that we've had on this panel. We will have more discussions and the dialogues on these issues, but for right now, to come to a close for a great discussion, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Larsson, the head of the Swedish Chamber of Commerce and Industry in New Delhi, to say the closing remarks.
Thank you, Arti, and thank you Ankit, Per, Sohanjit, for an excellent conversation and what you brought to the table. I thought it was very interesting to hear your thoughts, and it's amazing to see how LEADIT has grown from the starting point and where you are now. So I also want to say congratulations, Per, and all the best for the next summit and what you're working for, and to see Sweden and India take the lead in this area is very good. to see and the initiatives that kind of come out of that. So yes, we are running, it's 4 o'clock in India and 12:30 in Sweden. So it's time to end. So I will not speak, but I just really want to say thank you to our ambassadors, Ambassador Tanmay Lal for being with us today, for Ambassador Jan Tesla, recorded message, but I know that he's super interested in these dialogues as well as what's happening. Again, thank you a lot to the panelists and Arti, of course, SIBC and the collaboration we have with you of doing these sustainability dialogues together. Thank you for moderating this session in excellent way. And I think there is room for questions not to be discussed here in the meeting because we are closing, but if you have questions, do reach out to both SIBC or to us in the chamber, the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in India, and we can take them forward to the panelists. And also, if you have suggestions that are listening in on topics that you would like to hear, where Sweden and India are kind of working together and what we are doing, do also, let us know that, because we want these dialogues to continue and be something that both inspire and take us forward on this journey, as was said here, in collaborative partnership. So thank you very much, everyone, for today. Thank you, the audience, for everyone that joined in from Sweden and India, and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thank you again for joining us today. Please reach out to us on email, and thank you again, Ambassador Lal, Sohanjit Pair and Ankit, for being part of the first discussion, the first dialogue of 2023 in terms of how we move forward leadership for the new world we'd like to create.